Paul Atreides is just walking in on this really nice grassy knoll, and he's like just walking around, and then he looks at the water, and then there's a gigantic ship with water coming out of it, and it's like no big deal, just like probably the world's biggest CG simulation just on the background there. Welcome to the Visual Effects Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by ftrack and Action VFX. ftrack is an Academy Award-winning project management, production tracking, and media review platform for the creative industry. I've been using ftrack for the last 6 years, and it has helped me with all my visual effects projects. Forget about all the messy spreadsheets and the shared documents. ftrack is the best way to create a visual effects pipeline and to manage and communicate with your team and clients both locally and remotely. You can go to the video's description below for more information, or you can visit ftrack.com. This episode is also sponsored by Action VFX. Action VFX is the best place to get high-quality stock footage. I've used Action VFX in game cinematics, short films, trailers, and commercials. They are the best stock footage I've ever come across. You can also use the promo code Hugo's Desk for 10% off. Please visit actionvfx.com to learn more. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest VFX Notes episode. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and as always I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. G'day Hugo, how's things?
Hey Ian, how are you doing? Everything is good. Welcome everyone.
Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being back here. Thank you to our Patreons, in particular, people who have supported the podcast for the past couple of weeks. By signing up to Patreon, Hugo, and getting early access. We think that's a really wonderful thing you people have been doing. So I wanted to give a shout out to them straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for everyone that is sending support to the show. It really helps for us to run the show and to do more episodes. And yeah, you get all sorts of perks, you know. You get the show 3 days before everyone else, so you can watch it. Also, the show that you get is special because there's no ads and there's no commercials on that version that you get.
And of course, as well as thanking the Patreons, thank you to our sponsors. We wouldn't also be able to do the episode without them. And they were, of course, mentioned up front. And you can click the link in the YouTube page and also where this is hosted at beforesandafters.com. So thank you to our sponsors as well.
Thank you.
Hugo, today we're doing Dune. Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
Yes. Second Dune we're doing. Yeah. So I guess it's our favorite film. It's our favorite. I'm joking.
Should we hint that there might be another Dune-related episode sometime in the future? I think I've just hinted.
You're right. We're going to have a trifecta of Dune-related things. Yes, you're right. Yeah. We're talking about Dune today, 2020. Well, I guess 2020, 2021 / whatever, because it was filmed such a long time ago.
Absolutely. And something that we'll be talking about in a big way, I think, is there's a lot of visual effects, but it's a film that plays for big sets, practical effects, things that help immerse the actors and filmmakers into the making of the film. I think that makes it very VFX Oscar nomination worthy. It's just that kind of film, right? As well as being incredible visual effects work by the whole team.
It's funny that you're saying that. It ticks all the boxes, doesn't it? It's almost like, you know when they used to do jokes years ago about the actor to win the Oscar. It was like, okay, you have to either do a biography about someone about someone, or maybe something with the Second World War. Either of those, you would win the Oscar, So it's almost like it has those kind of things. But I'm no disrespect to the film. The film is stunning. So all of the films on the Bake Off it's a quite big year, isn't it? Like, it's a pretty big competition this year. So,
yeah, huge. Yeah. And in general, VFX Notes will be striving to cover all the films that at least get nominated.
Absolutely.
And so, keep an eye out for future ones. We've already covered a few of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cool.
So, I guess, Hugo, you can't not talk about the reaction that each of us had to this film. We're going to talk about the visual effects, but this is a film that they delayed so that, because of COVID, and so that it could be shown in cinemas. Interestingly, of course, in America, generally, it got a simultaneous release on HBO Max. I saw this film on a big screen, not IMAX in Sydney, but a big, beautiful Samsung Super HD LED something screen. It was just beautiful. That's almost my overall reaction. Just I had some kind of visceral reaction to what was happening on screen, the music, the epicness, just that I was back in a cinema again, even during COVID. What about you? What was your overall reaction to seeing this movie?
Yeah, I had the fortunate of watching it on IMAX, although not the film is not filmed on IMAX the whole time. So as the DOP Greg Fraser explains, he tried to keep it quite close quarters on the beginning of the film, and then it opens up to IMAX when they go to Dune, when they go to the desert. Also, most shots on the desert or IMAX. It's a spectacle, yes. Watching it on IMAX, really recommend. This film does not serve justice if you watch it on a normal Blu-ray in HD, or if you watch it on a screener or on the browser. It just doesn't. I can't wait to watch the film again on 4K Blu-ray on a projector again. You're right. It is a spectacle. It blows you away. The music is really, really strong. The cinematography is beautiful. The film just looks stunning on every frame. But I wasn't. Don't get me wrong. I was blown away by the visuals, and I was blown away by the sound. I struggled a little bit with the film itself. I felt that I have some of this problem sometimes with these films. I think the film was a bit too slow, and I don't know. Maybe maybe I'm very biased because I really liked the original Dune. It has a huge mark on me when I was very young. So maybe I'm just fixated with that version from David Lynch, which we've covered on the show here as well, so you guys can check that out. Maybe that's it. Obviously, this film is better than David Lynch's version, but it's better and it's not. I guess I have I just feel this film is too slow. I had the same exact problem on Blade Runner. Also felt Blade Runner, talking about Villeneuve, of course, as a director. I love some of his films. I love Arrival. I think Arrival is a stunning film. And I really like the whole thing on the film. I don't think it's too slow. It's just perfect for me. But Blade Runner, I had some issues. I thought it was too slow-paced and it was just too contemplative. And Dune is also a bit too contemplative. Also, I struggle when a film doesn't have any humor. And the film literally has almost nothing of humor whatsoever. So that's kind of my takeaway. I was blown away, but not for the film itself, just for the look of it. It looks amazing.
It's hard to obviously watch this film without harking back to Lynch or to obviously years of Star Wars and other things that are been inspired by Dune. I'll agree with you a little bit in that it's a bit contemplative. Maybe you were saying that in relation to Blade Runner more so.
Yeah.
Occasionally, there are way too many shots of Zendaya as Cheni.
Cheni,
with her veil blowing in the scarf, blowing in the wind. Occasionally, there's just one will come up and the audience sort of would laugh. And it's definitely not the intention. Definitely not the intention.
No, it's not the joke,
so I have to say that was probably the thing that didn't quite work. And then when we do get to meet her, I think very deliberately the meeting between her and Paul is kind of a bit awkward and not as spectacular as everyone was hoping. I can't remember how they managed that on the first film the other film, to be honest.
Yeah.
But as a thing here, I felt like the audience was waiting for that to happen, and then it was a bit low key. But I also think it was deliberate. I also think that was on purpose.
She's not much on the film as well, not except those shots. She's not much on the film. Yeah. No, I agree with you, but it has to do with the fact the film. I just feel the film has no relaxation on any moment. I mean, there's one joke on the film when they ask, when Josh Grohl and he's saying, "Smile, Gerlin," and he says, "I am smiling." That's how I feel about the film. The film is not smiling, but it's looking like his face. The film is very serious, and I feel like I don't think Oscar Isaac even smiles on the entire film. I just feel the film. I understand the source material is like this, but I always think there's always a place to have some kind of relaxation. I don't know. I feel like, and also like Timothy, I don't think he's very utilized on this film. I feel like he doesn't really get to do much, and he doesn't really get to talk much, and he's just basically been travel around and put in places and these things. And I don't know. I struggled a little bit. I didn't felt. Remember the reaction online, people saying that this is a masterpiece, that this is the best film they've ever seen, that this is this and this is that. There was a lot of big words thrown around, and I just didn't felt it had some flaws, and I felt a bit frustrated by the ending, by the way that it ends. It's just too sudden, and I don't feel like it's an ending of a chapter. It felt like it was too rushed to end like that. And I understand they're trying to do version like part 2 and even part 3 maybe. They're even talking about that, which probably will be, if they keep up to this pace, they will need 3 parts to do the talk. To do the whole. They'll need 3 parts, you know.
I don't know if I agree with you actually at all about that, Hugo.
That's fine.
I feel like, sure, and it's partly because you know the source material, and people did watch this film and feel like, oh, they've skipped over this world or this character because they're concentrating on Paul and his mother in some ways.
Yeah.
But I actually almost feel like the point of this film was just to sit in a cinema and be in awe. And I don't just mean for the visual effects. I just mean that kind of cinema experience. I actually do feel like Denis and the filmmakers were trying to deliver that. And there's a story there because there is a story. And it actually is what I walked away with. That is how I reacted to the film.
Yeah.
Just that.
No, I understand. I completely understand. I just, maybe I need to watch it again. I've watched it 3 times now, the film, but only once on IMAX. Wow. Only once on IMAX, because it's not on IMAX anymore. It's gone from the cinema. So I watched it once on IMAX, and then I watched it 2 times with the screenings from the Visual Effects Society for the awards, which are not very high quality. They're not very good. They're just watched on a browser. So it's not a very big experience. I understand what you mean. I just feel that I think this story needs more than just contemplative. This is a huge story. It's a huge space opera. There's so many other things going on all these planets. It's for me, it just skips too many things. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's because I know too much of the story. Maybe that's the thing. You need to kind of approach it not knowing the story. I just felt that needs to be more than just contemplative, pretty pictures. It has to have more than that, you know. And I felt that it was just a bit hollow, a bit shallow on that sense. But that's my opinion, you know. I'm not. I remember when I expressed this opinion on Twitter, I was not welcomed. So I know that most people hate my opinion for that, and most people think this film is the best thing since sliced bread. But I don't agree. I don't think it is. I think it has some flaws, and it's normal. It's fine. Things can have flaws. I don't feel like it's that perfect, but it is a spectacle. I don't want to spend much more time debating if the film is good or not, because I know what the general consensus is. The film is spectacular. There's no denying it. The cinematography and the set design and the visual effects and even the wardrobe. My God, like I wouldn't be even surprised if the film gets like 10 nominations just for those, just for those things. I'm not expecting any actors or not expecting acting to be nominated. I don't think there's anything there really to be nominated. The film is more about the film itself than the actors that are on it. But I'm expecting it to be very nominated with all those things because it is spectacular.
And just to hone in on one of those things, which is cinematography by the Australian DOP Greg Fraser.
Yeah.
Wasn't it interesting to learn about that kind of, like it's shot on digital, but then put onto some sort of photochemical print, then output back to digital, as a way of kind of giving back and of harking back to the film look. There's a lot more technical detail that you can read in other articles and in some befores and after stuff. But I reckon, Hugo, when I watched the film, I felt that. And then finding out that that was the approach by Greg Fraser and the grading team, I really like to hear that. That was kind of cool, right?
Yeah, it's very similar to, like, not the same process, but it's funny to see these kind of processes happening on these films. Same thing. I recently did a podcast about Ex Machina, and it's exactly kind of the same process. They felt Ex Machina was too sharp, the digital camera was going too sharp, and then they put in really old lenses, like from the 1940s that have been... No, it was lenses from the 80s, but they were rehoused from glass from the 40s and 30s. So they were like literally 100-year-old lenses to give almost like a Vaseline, almost like distorted patina on top of the digital Sony camera from Ex Machina. I think it's the same thing that they're probably achieving here. Like Greg Fraser, well, first of all, even before I talk about what you just mentioned, shout out to Greg Fraser. I just love his work, and Foxcatcher looks absolutely amazing. It's a really awkward film, and it's a really stunning film. Very, very disturbing, but it just looks beautiful. It's so well shot. Rogue One as well. My God, that's probably, again, I've mentioned this many times. We need to do a podcast about that. Like, it's my favorite Star Wars films of all times. And now the new Batman also looking cool with the new trailers. That looks like it's amazing. So this Greg Fraser is on the top here. Like, he's doing some amazing work in cinematography.
And also the virtual production stuff he basically did with Mandalorian and other things.
Absolutely. I was not only talking about the film work, but yes, absolutely. And of course, Zero Dark 30, which Zero Dark 30, a bit of, it's a flawed film. It has some problems, but I watched it on the cinema. It's almost pure black, the film. It's so dark, and it's so much on the edge of almost not even being exposed. And it's just it's just so subtle and so well done, so well achieved on Zero Dark 30. That film is an achievement in terms of cinematography. I don't believe he won the Oscar. He should have. If he didn't, maybe he did. I didn't check. But I think what you're talking about, the process, is really interesting. This is happening more and more now. Problem with digital cameras is, when you film with a film camera, you get the emulsion of the film. You get the typical displacement of like everything. It gets just like softened on a film. It's just soft. That's the whole thing. There's no real sharpness to a piece of celluloid, the 35 millimeter, or even if you shoot at 65, it's very difficult to be sharp. And then when you use these cameras, both the Sony, the Alexa, the Red, they're ultra sharp. They're almost like hyper reality, almost like they are too clinical, which is normal because it's a digital signal, and these manufacturers are trying to make a camera that works for sports, for film, for video, for everything. They're not just making a camera just for cinema. So there's two ways of you softening thing. Either you put a lot of old lenses, but then you produce a lot of problems for CG, and you produce a lot of problems that could become an issue for even for the processing of the film, for grading, for everything. Or this is one alternative. This is the old school way of almost like, okay, do you want to do a VHS effect on a film? Well, record the film on VHS and then digitize it again. It's almost like the same kind of deal, which have happened on films, especially like horror found footage films. They've done those kind of things where they've processed the film through an actual old school recorder so that it would have a look of that recorder from the 80s or the 90s. So I find it fascinating, but I also find it outrageous because it is absolutely possible to do it in software. It's absolutely possible to create this look in Nuke, in DaVinci. You can create really complex and advanced gizmos and plugins to recreate the aberrations, to recreate the distortions, to recreate that patina that film has without having to do it physically. I understand why they wanted to do this experiment, but I feel like it's a bit of a waste of money, a bit of waste of time. That's my opinion, because you are producing problems for the post-production that you didn't have to, because you could have done it at
no,
the
I
end.
totally disagree. I feel like
Yeah.
this is one of those classic things where someone talks about how does digital feel, how does film feel, and I don't think anyone can answer that question. Maybe a cinematographer can, but it's true. People will go and watch a film that's shot on film, and if you told them it was shot digitally, they go, "Oh, digital cameras are amazing," and then you go, "Oh, it was shot on film," and vice versa. All this is about, in my opinion, is introducing some randomness to the look and feel in a film that already is meant to be washed out and has a sand desert feel mostly. Most of the scenes are there. That suits maybe the old look of film, and I'm not even sure. Give me a before and after of what the process did and what it ended up as. Maybe normal people can't tell, but I just think it's part of the whole thing of immersing the filmmakers as much of the audience into a love of film.
Yeah.
Right.
I know.
I think it's part. It's not a particular thing to waste time on or give to give a particular look. It's part of the whole process of this film, which is, I mean, we're going to talk about it, but they built sets. They did as much as they could in camera. That's a thing that I get told by VFX soups all the time in interviews. But here it happened, and it's a Denis thing. And I just think that film approach that Greg Fraser spearheaded was just part of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I understand that. But maybe it's just my brain as a VFX supervisor and as a compositor that is thinking that it's creating absolutely unnecessary more work for not a lot of return, because I really can guarantee you that you can recreate all of that randomness in post-production as well, because people have done it before. They've done it before, and the result was either very similar or identical. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a taste thing. It's funny because Villeneuve just came from a film that was exactly the opposite. When you come from Blade Runner, where Roger Deakins is exactly the opposite. Like, he's a very exact DOP. He doesn't like those kind of things. He's the kind of guy that wants sharpness, and he wants to put a new lens on the camera. He's the kind of DOP that doesn't really have that kind of retro or nostalgic factor. He's a very naturalistic photographer. And it's funny that now, like, Villeneuve came to this DOP and to this kind of aspect for Dune. I don't really think that nothing happened there. I think Roger Deakins was probably just busy, or maybe he didn't want to collaborate again. He probably wanted someone else. But they're very different looking films, that's for sure. And the aesthetics of it. I'm just like trying to understand, why would you go through this process knowing that it could... I'm just being devil advocate here, Like, why would you do that process if you know you can probably do it? And you're just like creating problems for yourself and for the crew that is trying to do the tracking, the visual effects and everything. I don't know. Maybe it's just me being devil advocate here, but I just feel a bit unnecessary. I'm not alone on this one. Like, a lot of people were saying the same
what
are
the problems that it creates?
Well, when you start having a plate that is softer and softer and softer, it becomes harder to track, and it becomes harder to match when you're trying to put in the CG. Nothing. I mean, obviously, these things are these days easier to do. And I guess we're gonna talk about the visual effects very soon. And I guess on this film, because a lot of the visual effects there's a lot of visual effects, of course, but a lot of the shots that were actually filmed don't have as many visual effects as people might think. Because this film does have a lot of full CG shots, a lot of them, and then the ones that have visual effects, they are very integrated and merged with what was shot. And I think people don't realize until they see the breakdowns, which I'm going to play back while we watch this podcast. They don't realize how much actually was shot on camera. There's so much shot on camera. So having a lot of processing on top of a film that introduces flickering and introduces distortion, introduces blur and shakiness on pixels, just becomes a problem for tracking. It becomes a problem for matching things, becomes a problem for integration, becomes a problem even to match CG, because then you have to also add all those things to the CG. So it's, I guess, let me put it this way. If I'm an artist, of course I love the look of it, like as a director. But if I'm the guy doing the visual effects, I'm going to be concerned because this is so much more difficult than it should have been.
No,
so that's my point of view.
I follow what you're saying. It's an interesting thing because you could argue the cleanest plates you can give the VFX studio and artists, the better, right? They can do more with it. They can integrate their CG. But Hugo, we've watched projects, TV shows, films, where the visual effects work is excellent, but there is something missing, and it's hard to explain what that is. There's so many reasons something might be missing. But often it's because it's completely synthetic.
I know.
Or it's actually been manipulated so much that it starts not looking as real. I kind of always wondered whether something like this approach, and it isn't just this process that Greg Fraser's doing, it's like going out and shooting Ornithopter cockpit shots and landings and actually throwing dust around. I mean, I can't imagine visual effects studios are happy about that either. But doesn't it give them the right plate to have something there as real match to?
I think there is a bit of a confusion here. I'm not saying that's not the way to do it, like at all. Like you hear me on this podcast, I'm always saying that we should have a real plate, that we should have as much reference as possible. That's the way I work as well. I'm not saying any of that. Like, and I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm doing here. Like, I'm just saying that I felt that it's one step too further because it becomes I don't know, like it's too analog for this, and I'm just asking the question: isn't it maybe a bit too nostalgic? Maybe just like I don't feel like it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if someone showed me the original versus the processed thing, it looks much better. But I don't know. I'm just asking the question: couldn't it been done after? They could have easily gone on and shot it on film instead. That probably would have been simpler than processing it like that, where you shoot digital, but then it's almost like, okay, you wanted film, but you didn't film in film. Why didn't you just film it in film? Like it's a bit like, Christopher Nolan films in film because he likes film. If Villeneuve likes film, shoot film. I'm just like, I don't really get it. Why go through the whole hoop of let's film it on digital the sharpest possible, but then we want to make it as blurry as possible? I don't know. Like maybe there was some constraint. I don't know everything about this production, of course, but I don't know. Like I don't want to spend much more time on this, but I really want people to understand that I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm just making everyone realize that it just introduces a lot of problems, and I'm just like questioning, is it worth it? That's the only thing, for the problems. Maybe if you ask the visual effects artists, they're fine with it. Maybe they are, but I'm not sure I would be happy with that because might be too much problems coming on the road. But I would love to see the originals. I would have loved to see the originals versus what they've got. So
it sounds like they had a million other things to worry about that they had to overcome, which they did, I feel. It's an interesting discussion. I think the segue here, Hugo, is what we could term the practical approach to filming in Dune. And, just a really obvious one here that has got a lot of attention is you're basically needing to build computer generated landscapes, environments, interiors, spaceships, whatnot. So a lot of this film was filmed in Budapest, on a big backlot or in stages. And one of the things that they implemented, this was mostly via the production VFX suit, Paul Lambert, was what we're going to say is relevant color screens.
Yeah.
Sand screens for Arrakeen. But it turns out there were blue screens. There were green screens. There were grey coloured screens.
Yeah.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make is there's something about the production of this film imposed by Denis Villeneuve and the VFX soup to not just be the wall of blue or the wall of green that you do tend to get with these big sci-fi films.
Yeah.
And I kind of loved it. And I think people are really responding to that in the coverage as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, like as Paul says on the interview that you've did with him on Before and Afters, how does he say it? Denis gets depressed by green screen.
Yeah.
He gets depressed by green screen.
You hear about actors getting depressed on green screen for days and days as well.
I completely understand that, and I hear me out on this. I don't want to sound like a douche here, but this is nothing new, okay? Like, this is nothing new. I know it might be new for a lot of people watching, like a lot of people from the outside of the industry watching, especially the way they spin it. When you look at the Blu-ray, the way they spin that this is just a one-click solution that worked really well. Like, because if you look at the Blu-ray extras, they literally just show the sand screens. It's like a 10-second sequence. They show the sand screens and they say, then we just inverted it. It was blue and it's done. And it's so ridiculized the way that they've showed it and so oversimplified it. They oversimplified it so much. But so this is nothing new. We've done this many times over the decades of shooting with colors that will be the backgrounds later. A lot of productions have done this before, especially productions that know that roto is going to be the majority of the thing. But the amazing thing about this here is that it is really cool the way that I guess it was maybe a fortunate thing that the specific color of the dunes and the specific color of the yellow of the desert does become a quite nice blue for keying. It does when you put it on negative.
Just to quickly round that out. So yes, there was this concept of it's a sand color when inverted is blue and seems to be something you can use for keying. But Hugo, I'm not even sure that was the main point of sand screen colored blue screens.
No, not at all.
It was the fact that there's things like spill, there's things like what we just said, actors and filmmakers getting a bit sick of blue or green. Yeah. So they trying to immerse them more in the desert landscape.
Well, the set people, they roll over their eyes. Their eyes roll over when they see the blue screen coming in. So I feel that this is a very good way of getting the crew on board more, because everything kind of looks like it's more normalized, It looks like a set. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there was just this amazing bonus that Paul Lambert, who has a rich history in compositing,
of course,
starting with CineSync and digital domain, and in fact he's the inventor of the IBK Kia in Nuke. He just knew that it could work for that purpose. I guarantee you, if we talk to Dean Egg and Wiley and some of the in-house visual effects team, they will say, we will hear that it was all sent for roto, that it was all rotoed. But it is anyway, isn't it, these days? I'm pretty sure every frame is rotoed for mats and splines.
No, the genius thing about here with Paul and his team and the amazing composers on this film, which it was an amazing team on board on this, the genius about this is that it does help, of course, because basically, well, let's start from the colored screens first. The biggest advantage of the color screens is that at least if you know what's going to be on the background, that's the plan here. Like if you know there's going to be a desert, you put a color of desert. If you know there's going to be like a dark sky, you put a dark sky. You kind of like try to work with what's going to be there, by using the concept art as a guide. And that really helps because then the edges are easy to control. It's easier to find the edge for you to roto. It's easier for you to, maybe you can key some parts and then roto others. I would say that maybe it helps, like there's a huge percentage of the rotoscoping that will be easier because of you finding that edge. And the invert, which is a subproduct of this kind of color that they used on set, really helps for you to distinguish those edges. Of course, you still have the issue with the skin, because the skin will also be with the same color as the sand screens, but at least you can see the edge between the face and the background. So at least it gives you more, it's an easier thing to roto for sure.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah, there was a great breakdown that Paul gave me for one of the befores and afters articles, and it's a DNEG breakdown, where apparently there's no visual effects in the shot at all, and it's a shot of Jason Momoa's character, Duncan. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's Duncan. Yeah.
Let's do the Ian Fails apology for getting characters' names wrong and locations wrong right now. And basically it's about reflections in helmets, which, as we know, is a thing you bid in visual effects. You either don't wear the helmet and add it, the glass reflection, or you bid the comp work. With the sand screens and things moving and whatever in the reflection, they were able to achieve a lot of in-camera reflections. I'm quite sure there's lots of fix-its as well, because there just is.
Yeah.
But it was a really cool thing to see, and I think just an added bonus of going with that approach.
Yeah, well, you can get away with more, like that's the thing, like because on some shots, yes, they probably had to go in and fiddle around with things, but because you have the same color on the reflections, both on the metallic surfaces, but also on the visors, like you say, at least you know that, okay, maybe that shot, you don't even need to touch it, because then you have, this is one less shot that we have to even care about. I'm sure that in the middle of all these shots, especially these long takes, if you have a long take where they're chatting and the reflection just happened by sheer luck to just get that color from the sand screen, that's a bonus right there. That's a win. Like, oh shit, we don't need to do this shot. This 30-second long speech doesn't need any VFX. And then let's focus on the other shot where we have the entire city exploding. So I feel like that's the key thing here. Because if they really had to if they would have done it in green screen, it would have been a massive undertaking. Well, they would have ended up probably doing the CG helmet route, like doing completely the helmet like they've done before on other films. They probably would have had to recreate full HDR environments for the reflections of what's behind. It would have been a big budget thing. That's the thing. Like, this was a big budget job, but would have been even more budgeted. It would have been more expensive. So yeah, it's genius. And shout out to Paul and shout out to his team. It's really, really amazing. And I want to see more of this on films. I want to see more people using colors and using grays and yellows and blue. Like, really want to see people doing more of this, because it's old school mentality. It's like filmmaking to its core, like trying to find a solution that works for that specific shot instead of trying to just... I see a lot of productions just putting the green screen and putting the blue without even almost thinking about it. Like, oh yeah, let's just put it there because we'll fix it later. And that's, Ian, when you see the issues you were discussing before, when you see these shows and, this doesn't look right. Oh, it looks a bit weird. It's a bit blurry and the edge is a bit strange and it's a bit of a glowy feeling to it. That's when you get those things, when it's just thrown out there without even thinking, so...
Yes, I agree. Maybe Hugo, in the same vein as how that helped from a practical point of view and then was absolutely enhanced by DNEG and other teams, I feel like the other practical side of the filmmaking was how many of the Ornithopter shots were achieved. There's clearly a CG half to this that DNEG solved, and oh my god, I love that craft, and I just love the wings and the dragonfly look and I just love it to death.
It's amazing, yeah. It's
yes.
like a heavy duty military grade helicopter. It's beautiful.
I want one,
isn't it?
I want one. Yeah.
It's a bit like what Dennis has been doing on his film, and also like this all came from like George Holt's concept art, of course, and then of course the practical element which is amazing as well, which is coming from the amazing from Patrice Vermette, the production designer, which is also him and his team do a spectacular job on this project. But those helicopters is how does Denise says it on the behind the scenes. I wanted my mother to look at this helicopter and believe that it was an actual military helicopter. And I feel like he's achieved that. He has.
Yeah.
It looks like a U.S. Army helicopter,
And then, of course, because they built one or possibly two and had them occasionally on cranes, and they had actors get in them, and they shot cockpits on motion bases. These things happen in films all the time. We do see these mock-ups and, partial sets. But there is just something about this full-scale Ornithopter out there in the desert, but also in Budapest, that just is something extra for the actors, for the crew. And then presumably it enables a lot of as much as possible in-camera shots.
Yeah.
I just thought it sounds so weird to talk about this in a multi-million-dollar film, but it adds so much production value. Right? Like, that doesn't make much sense to say that, because you think about that more with indie things or commercials or something.
No,
but it does here.
I think it does. It helps every. Well, first of all, let's just say that this is not small. This is 11 tons. So it's an 11-ton model. So it's almost like a real thing. And it's all fully functional. The interior, amazing work that the set design team has made here. It's all with gadgets and little rotation things and buttons, and it's all fully functioning and lit up. And I'm sure the actors had a field day with this. They probably loved it because it felt like they were on an helicopter for real, and then like be flown around. But this is like, Ian, this is the perfect visual effects augmentation, because they went over and they shot it with dust. They shot it with real dust. They shot it on a real set. They even went over and actually rigged this, like you said, on a platform. The whole thing is there for you to then augment and to add the CG. And obviously there's a lot of shots which are full CG on this, but a lot of it is actually merging. Even when it crashes, you saw when it crashes, they actually shot the crash against sand so that they would get the real sand behavior. They had like a little a street of sand, and then the helicopter actually crashes into it, and then they used as much as they could, and then they added more simulations on top.
And
it's
a
just
shout
amazing.
out. Yeah, we should give a shout out here to the special effects supervisor, who I'm totally going to get his name mispronounce his name here, which is Gerd Nefzer, who is also on Blade Runner 2049, and is a bit of a master at the moment of motion bases and just mayhem. There's so much dust, and the cranes that would lift these practical ornithopters are really cool. And he's done fire and explosions and other things later for the film as well. But I wanted to make sure we give a shout out to him.
Yeah. And I think that's why it looks so good, because of that sense of merging. It's pure filmmaking here. They shot as much as they could for real, and then added CG. That's why I'm glad you shouted out, because they achieved some amazing plates on set that are like perfect starting points for you to add the rest of the stuff that is missing from the CG.
What I'm dying to say here, sorry if I'm getting a bit overexcited, is how good are the breakdowns where you see actual helicopters in the plate and then erased and then clean plated and then the Ornithopter. I mean, it's just communicates so well the level that Denis wanted to go to
Yeah.
well, you're gonna follow the real helicopter. You're gonna get the wash.
Yeah.
You're gonna get the weird kind of imprecision that sometimes happens with choppers.
Yeah.
And just replicate it. And
Instead
so I just love that.
Instead of doing all these flybys, instead of doing they did have full CG shots as well in the middle, but a lot of the flights of the helicopters were done practically as a flyby, and then of course they tracked in the rest of the city, and they tracked in the rest of the rocks and the helicopters, of course. It just helps because you get a real camera, you get a real sense of weight, you get a real sense of cinema. Like it's like a military procession. And shout out to my favorite shot on the film is that the tele zoom lens shot where you see all the helicopters in a row, and you have the one on the front, and then you have all the ones on the back with the little wings on motion blur. That shot is absolutely stunning. It's just stunning. And that's one of the shots that you see the helicopter there, and then they erase it. Yeah,
it feels like it's a real shot. I think we have to praise DNEG's hard surface modeling work there. Yeah. Often we're talking, Hugo, about creatures, and we're talking about great comp work or explosions in films. Sometimes we don't get a chance to just talk about vehicles, and hard surface stuff. That's some of my favorite work in the film, actually, that DNEG's done.
Yeah, the amount of detail is just absolutely stunning. We're going to talk about the explosion and the attack, the Arrakeen attack in a minute, but the amount of detail where they've built... There's minuscule ribbons and detailing happening on these helicopters and also on these vehicles and on the harvester as well. That is just stunning. It just gives it the full sense of believability. But again, the approach of this film is always to build as much as they can. Even on the harvester, they also built big wheels and big parts of it that they could have merged. And even like the staircase and everything is all built for real. No, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it. This is the way to actually approach this kind of film. Yeah. And I know it's expensive and I know it's complicated, but this is we just recently talked about the same approach on Christopher Nolan's Tenet. It was the same kind of approach, filming as much practical as possible. Again, DNEG has a record of this kind of stuff, going on. So,
but I agree, obviously, and even when those flying scenes, including the crash, those flying scenes become full CG, because they're in a dust storm or whatever. What I really loved about those also in particular is it was never that clean, the camera work.
Yeah.
The what I keep saying is the hard surface modeling stuff, texturing of those ornithopters and other vehicles. Something about it was as messy as you might get if you had to send an Alexa out there to shoot, this stuff.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoyed that in the film in general, actually. None of this is too precise or too clean, even though it's all beautifully framed. And I just felt like DNEG did a stunning job of not making it too pretty, because I think that was their remit. That's what they were asked to do, and they pulled it off.
And the other thing as well, especially on the crash scene and especially on the storm, like you mentioned, is the way that the camera lingers on shots. This film has a lot of that, which I love. Like, I think you stay on sequences for a long time. The crash, for example, it's a single several minute long sequence, almost in silent. You don't even have music on that section, almost, and you just hear this storm, and you are strapped in with them, like just flying through this dust cloud, and you just linger, just like they did as well in Blade Runner. You're like sometimes like 20 seconds on one single shot on crashing. And it just gives it a sense of believability and of also a fright, instead of cutting away. He doesn't cut much on those things, which is fantastic. I think that's really good editing, really good filmmaking. Shout out to the editor, Joe Walker, he's amazing as well. He did a stunning job with those sequences to convey the sense of dread that they could have died. I thought it was great.
While we're sort of talking about DNEG's work, and really that could continue for 3 more hours, I think, Hugo. I mean, let's talk about the sandworms. It's so associated with Dune. I think everyone was curious about what Denis was going to do here compared to Lynch, but also because in film history there are other films with big, huge creatures in the sand. We even saw a sand creature in Mandalorian. I was scared to death seeing the sandworms during Dune, and I had seen it in the trailer. Yeah. And I think that that's the success of the sandworm here. I might keep saying sand dune, I mean worm.
Yeah.
Partly because you don't get to see it much. Yeah. It's kind of hidden. And partly because you sort of know more is coming in part 2 by the end of the film. But in general, I really enjoyed the interaction between the dunes and the worms. I enjoyed the whale baleen look of the mouth and stuff like that. What about you, Hugo? What was your reaction to the worms?
Yeah, they are... It's amazing, yeah. The sense of scale, especially, they really nailed the sense of scale, which was a huge failure on David Lynch's film because it was just impractical to film such a big thing on a miniature. They would always ran into defocusing and depth of field issues on the miniatures. You look at this on IMAX and it's like it is really there. It's really huge. The whole thing, the aging of the skin, the way the skin is crusted with the sand, the way the individual teeth are, some of them little brokens and some of them bend, and there's an enormous amount of detail on this thing. That's why it has such a sense of scale, and especially the night shots where he almost swallows them up and then kind of talks to them. The sandworm almost talks to them at that moment. No, it's stunning work, and from a visual effects point of view, this is some of the biggest simulations I've ever seen in my life. Like, I feel like this is probably, if not the record, it's probably close. They ended up doing 10 terabyte big simulations. They even talk about on the interviews and on the behind the scenes where they basically just kept going until the computer completely crashed. So they were like, okay, how much can we put in there? Okay, it failed the computer now. Okay, so I guess that's the limit of how much we can put in. This is like simulation to the next level. Absolutely. DNEG has done a fantastic job here. I
like to think in my head that the creators of Houdini side effects are like, we basically built Houdini for Dune to happen properly. Yeah. That's not what they've told me ever or anything like that. But I sort of like to feel that, Hugo, because the sand deliberately looks liquefied as this creature goes through it. It's got the detail. I would say over the years, as grain sims and particle sims have continued to get better, sometimes what got lost was a lot of the detail and it was just blurry.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure that having to render this thing at IMAX res meant that they knew they had to nail it. But again, DNEG has made that possible. And also what works is shot design. It's not crazy camera stuff following this creature in and out of the sand. It's as if they did go and stick a tripod out there to capture this creature. And so what works is that it's not over the top, even though it's this massive creature.
Yeah.
So I kind of love that part of it too.
It's the groundness, yeah, you're right. Like, it is an actual camera tripod or even a dolly or even handheld camera looking at this thing and from a perspective of a human. And so that's why it's so big, because you're like looking up and looking at this fantastic thing. No, it's stunning. And also the several layers because of course they couldn't simulate the whole thing in one go, so they had to do multiple simulations, because you have this, of course, the big simulation of the sand, of the actual surface, of the actual desert. And then, of course, you have the simulation of all the dust coming out of the actual creature when it floats and goes up and down the sand. And then you have extra little simulations of just the sand coming out of the teeth and just the sand coming, especially that big shot where the sandworm is eating the harvester. Stunning shot. The cool thing is reading on this, like obviously simulations and rendering dust is always a problem because it's very difficult to preview. It's always very difficult for you to view what you're doing, and that's always been a challenge. No matter how fast computer you have, and no matter how much RAM you have, it doesn't really matter. You always have to wait several hours for the simulations, and then you can watch something. And it becomes really tricky to iterate, because you're like trying to reach a good-looking shot, but then you have to wait days for you to even see it. And then when it comes back, it's like, I lost the plot here. I lost my train of thought almost when I was discussing this. So it was really cool to see that they've developed a GPU-driven specific custom tool to actually scale up and down this sand so that they could rapidly preview low quality versions, not poly, this is not polygonal, low quality versions of the sand in GPU. They could just test things, they could just see the shots, frame shots, and then rapidly just switch to full quality if they wanted to preview a couple of frames. This was really smart. It's a really nice way to doing it, and I feel like we're going to see more of this in the future as GPUs are now so powerful. It becomes finally we're achieving a moment where we could kind of see GPU-driven physics and GPU-driven simulations to help with the iteration and help with artists' interactivity. I think that's what happened here, and that's why they could iterate so much and really reach what you've done,
And just an extension of that is the launch of the massive ships on. Can you say the name for me, Hugo? Caladan.
Caladan, yeah. Caladan, yeah.
Out of the ocean. I reckon, Hugo, I could probably watch a whole film, of 2-hour film of those ships launching out of the ocean, the sea.
The whole scale, like, of that ship, the water. It again, the whole film is like this. Even the ships that arrive to Arrakis, even the big the spice Milan, the big tube ship, the ship that they've used to fold space, also looks huge. I think they really nailed these simulations. They really nailed the scale of these shots. There's way too many visual effects for us to cover and to go through, like, because you just reminded me of that sequence, that entire sequence, it's so funny because it's so low key, like Paul Atreides is just walking in on this really nice grassy knoll, and he's like just walking around, and then he looks at the water, and then there's a fucking gigantic ship with water coming out of it, and it's like no big deal, just like probably the world's biggest CG simulation just on the background there, and they're like it's such a nice shot. I love it because he's just like, music is flowing, he's like walking through the fields. Oh, it's a nice day out. That there's too many visual effects on this show for us to go through everything. I just it's huge.
Well, that's a good point. Let's pinpoint a couple more though. I particularly loved, and I don't know how to describe it super well, it's a premonition, I think, that Paul has of a future battle on Arrakis. And it's just a big fight scene. Now, when I watched the film, I thought, wow, they've done a great job there of stunt choreography on the backlot somewhere in Budapest. Of course, I find out that the whole thing is completely CG. Motion captured,
with those stunts, of course, with those stunt
by
people,
stunties and others in Vancouver, coordinated by DNEG in Vancouver. It's stunning, in my opinion, and partly because it's a bit of a one-er, I think.
It's like a samurai showdown sequence. It's awesome the way they're fighting with the swords and everything. I know what you mean. I was fooled. I must agree. I was fooled. It doesn't look CG at all. I think testament to the whole team involved on this because it looks real. It looks absolutely real. It is a stunning sequence. It's a huge achievement of rendering, and obviously, I don't know disrespect. There's obviously certain things on this shot that help it to make it more real, because obviously they are with military suits and they're fighting really quickly. There's a lot of motion blur.
And they're fully covered.
They're fully covered. So when you
Yes.
see faces and skin in this, it becomes a bit of a problem. But this time, and that's the only moment that kind of throws you out of the shot, when Paul Atreides opens the helmet and you see his face, which I know it's a plot story. You need to know that it's him, so that's why they opened the helmet. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for him to open the helmet on the middle of battle.
But is it meant to be him a bit older? Because
It
I'm
is,
not
yeah,
super clear on that, but I think
so this sequence is
part of
part, if you regarding the book and also regarding the original film from David Lynch, this happens years later. So this is after Paul Atreides goes and joins the Fremen. He's underground. He then trains the entire Fremen army, and then the Fremen army, together with him, attack the Arrakeen. So this is like years later, when he's actually the Judean. He's like the big the one, I guess, like the Matrix. He's the one. He's the guy that they've always been talking about on the scripts, on the scriptures. So yeah, that's definitely, he must be 3-4 years older than the original film. Yeah.
And Hugo, can you spend the rest of this podcast just explaining the entire plot of Dune to me? Thanks. The book, the novel. Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
Sometime later. I don't know if you want to mention, maybe just in passing, but I really wanted to at least shout out the Arrakeen attack, because one thing I wanted to talk about, there's too many things there's too many things to talk about on that attack, but there's two things that I really wanted to focus on. First of all, the way that they filmed it, where they would use real gas fire sources on set to do the interaction. That's part one, which is amazing, and that should always be the way that you should do it. They were out on set, this is outdoors, of course, on the desert, and they actually had full gas fires going on the back. And that gave you all the amazing little light sources. It gave you the edges. It gave you all those things were already given on the shot that you can follow. And then on top of that, they've composite these, probably I would say, some of the biggest explosions of warfare I've ever seen.
They're amazing.
This is like full warfare, Iraq-style explosion kind of deal. It's like, it's so grounded. It's like you're there in the middle of the biggest bombing in the world. The fire plumes, which are the only illumination of the whole shot. The shot is pitch black, and it's so beautiful because that fire illuminates everything, and then together with the shields and everything. Those shots, which majority of them are full CG, except when the troops are on the floor. When they are on the floor, it's like I said, with the real practical fires to do the light interaction, but then it switches to full CG. That entire sequence is very big.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
It's beautiful.
There's two key moments that I loved in that sequence. One is some kind of gunship which fires the flares type thing.
Yeah.
Which there's some nice concept art through to final work that you can track with that. I just loved it. Simple as that. Another is, at some point, one of those bombs destroys one of the huge ships. And I was so convinced that was a miniature buck or a miniature being blown up. Like, I just thought, they've blown up a black painted thing and then put DNEG's done a CG ship over it. But of course, no, it's a CG creation. Mm-hmm. I just thought it was part of that huge immersive kind of thing that I felt like in the film. And you're exactly right, Hugo. I felt like I was there. At some terrible war.
Yeah, it's a warfare shot. That shot particularly that you're talking about, beautiful. Like this entire thing, of course, was a very complex sequence done. Shout out to the CG and compositing team. They used Clarice for rendering and Houdini as well to do this. Used it in deep compositing with holdout mats and a lot of deep pipeline, because that's the only way really to comp something like this. And then using light groups and a lot of AOVs and a lot of passes, they've basically, and even little things like particles, ambers, even in Nuke and everything, there's a mix of everything. You have the plate, you have the ambers in Nuke, you have the explosions from Houdini, you have the renders from Clarice, you have everything kind of merged together. These are some of them, some massive composites happening here. And then on top of all of that, like the image distortion and retiming effects that they had to do for the shields as well, which we're not going to talk about that. You see that even on when they're training, but you see that on the ships as well, like on the big ships when,
but we're not going to talk about that?
Well, I don't know. Like, we can't talk about everything. We can't talk about everything. But yeah, this is... but these shots are magnificent. But I wanted to say one thing. Like, the reason why these shots really work is because of everything you've seen before as well, because it kind of ramps up to this. You spend the entire film watching these magnificent interiors. You see these, which is really traditional, old school, golden age Hollywood. It's almost like the sets of Ben-Hur. It's almost like the sets of Cleopatra. They did these massive sets that look like concrete with big walls. Paul's room and the hallway inside the Iraqi's building. The whole thing was really built. Even the sets on the home planet of Paul Atreides, even on Caladan, they really build it. And so you spend the entire film with this groundness and this scale. Everything is big and it's real, and they're walking through these stone walls and they're walking through these corridors. And then you go to outside here, and then you see this big explosion. You're sold already. Like, the whole scale of the thing has been up, growing and growing and growing to this big attack from the Arrakeen. And I think that's why it becomes even more, it resonates even more, because the film builds this, I don't know, this film is a fascinating example of where they could have ruined it so easily. If they would have just done full CG, green screen, all of the interiors, all of the sets been in CG, they could have just ruined it. It would not look like this. It would not be this grounded,
Okay. Now, Hugo, in terms of ruining it, hear me out. Training shields almost ruined this movie. Almost ruined this movie. I love what they ended up as. I understand it's a DNEG effect.
Yeah.
Meticulous frame by frame compositing, some sort of blue and red distinction going on, which wasn't in the initial approach.
Yeah.
But when they saw that they needed to show who was winning, who was not winning, was added in. It's just that personally, the cell animated, hand animated,
I know where
big
this is
blocky
going.
shields from the Lynch film are so awesome.
Yeah.
Of course, Denis didn't want to replicate that.
I know. But it's a shame. Why not?
Well, I just love them so much.
They're so much better. They're not better, man. No disrespect. I have friends of mine at DNEG. No disrespect. Like, I think they did amazing, and the military realism of the shields is fascinating, because that's how, if we had that technology, most likely it would have looked like that. That's how I think the whole film is like this. Like, I think Villeneuve's approach was always like that. Okay, if we're in the future, how would it look if it was existing? Sure. And I think the shields look real. They look like, okay, this is how a military shield would look. Like, it's not to be pretty, it's a shield. So, I completely get that. And why would it be blocky? Because it's just going to get in the way. Why would it be that big? Why would you look like a sack of cubes?
Because it just looks cool, Hugo.
I know. That's the thing. That's the thing. And
all right. No.
But I wish that they, like you, I really didn't. That's right at the beginning of the film, and I really wish. I was really disappointed. Yes, I was extremely disappointed, and I wanted something else. I know, but again, that's actually done in camera. Not done in camera. Sorry, what I was going to say is that was not done in camera. It's all done in post. But there are. Little shout out to a sequence on the film that it's a bit underrated and a bit understated, which is the hologram scene that he's on the room with Paul, the Hunter-Seeker sequence. which is really cool the way that
Amazing.
they did it. You know, they basically ended up getting this CG tree. They sliced it in several lasers, and then they had the real lasers on set. So Paul Atreides, you know, Timothy was actually walking through this light, and obviously enormous, amazing rotomation in paint and roto to actually put and add the rest of the CG tree and the rest of the hologram. But what they captured, Greg captured on set together with Villeneuve already on the plate, is already mind-blowing. The laser and the hologram touching his face is already kind of halfway there. And then DNAG just added, well, I don't know if it was DNAG, but
I think Wiley, DNAG came up with the approach because it's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And then Wiley pulled it off.
Exactly.
So,
that's right.
yeah.
That's right. You're right. So those shots look beautiful. It's just another little extra effect the film has. The film has so many visual effects, man. We haven't even went on everything. There's also landscapes. There's the harvester. There's like, you also have like the whole thing with the city, the actual, even on the Arrakeen, like the Arrakeen planet, which the Arrakeen planet is like a mixture of Blade Runner / RoboCop / dark and gritty, oily planet. That's also stunning. Like that's another film right there. This doesn't end. Like this is a 2.5 hour long visual effects fest.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, but maybe, Hugo, we could finish, because there is so much to talk about in this film. We could finish with our favourite character. Well, I think it's one of my favourite characters in the film, which is the Baron, played by Stellan Skarsgård. What an amazing character, and hardly in the film at all.
I know, he's only a few minutes. I can't wait to see part 2 and 3, to see him more. Amazing cast, isn't it? His presence, just the acting alone. I mean, this guy has been around. Like he's an absolute legend in filmmaking, and also like a legendary family. There are so many of them, so many of them that are so amazing actors. But no, this every time he was on the film, that is the moment. I felt glued to the screen when I watched him. It's so dark, so scary. He's absolutely disgusting. He's horrible. My God, can you make him worse? Because this is just... it's perfect for the character. And if you felt the one from David Lynch was disgusting, my God, this is another level.
I know. I mean, I was looking at the oil and stuff that he's in, the milky fluid. I don't even know what that is. And I was like, oh, but that means an actor really did get in something, and even that's just fantastic. But what about the makeup effects and costume? That was pretty cool too, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is, we sometimes joke, oh yeah, he just had a fat suit. This is another step. Like, this is amazing work done by Love Larson and Eva Barr as well. They both were part of this, of doing the makeup and the suit. Obviously, they themselves, Love and Eva, they are actually legendary already. They've been nominated for the Academy already. They've done some amazing work on A Man Called Ove, and they also did some amazing work on The 100-Old Man Who Climbed Out of the Window and Disappeared. These people are on the top of their game. And this entire suit is not just a suit. It's several layers. You see him on the behind the scenes of him. It takes 7 hours to get this on his face. There's like several layers of little latex going to the face, going to the neckline. The entire suit has multiple layers of fat, and my God, when you first see the film, I kind of thought, oh, maybe there's a bit of CG there. And of course there's cleanup, and of course there's of course there's a lot of retouching. But effectively, he is on a suit. He is there, which is really cool.
Yeah. In the behind the scenes as well for him, I felt like it seems that there was a bit of wire work, to do the hovering for him.
Yeah.
But actually in the film, that's not a big part of it. It's much more close up on him. It's suggested that he's hovering. He gets in the characters' faces, like up close. And I like that because, of course, in the other film, he does hover and fly, and that's sort of a funny moment. Here, it's not so much that, but it still works.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure you'll be playing the behind the scenes now, and it does show that kind of wire work there.
Yeah, no, which is a nice homage to the original film, where a lot of times they just use the platform just to elevate him or something. They did similar things here, but I think it became much more scary because, his performance. It's almost like Apocalypse Now, Marlon Brando kind of thing. Even with him on even has that moment that he's putting his hand on the head and everything, almost like a Marlon Brando sequence that he's out of his mind. So it's almost about the weight. There's a few times that you see him floating and flying, particularly when he comes in to kill the Atreides family. He's like floating with the troops. That's a really nice shot.
Yes.
And of course, then inside the big room where everyone gets killed by the poison gases. So there's a little bit of this and that of hovering, but
absolutely,
yeah, the big and of course
it was just more suggested sometimes, which I liked. Yeah.
But I guess the two shots that for me personally still the show with him was, of course, the water bathe, the whatever he's bathing on, which I don't know, like I guess he's annoyed. Oh, it's disgusting, that thing. And of course the floating when he first sees when he's talking with Charlotte Rampant's character, and he kind of just says that they're all gonna die, and he just like floats up like a balloon, and he's just hovering on the top. It's just shout out to the to everyone involved on this, because 7 hours of makeup, damn, I must have been difficult. It seemed like he liked it a lot, didn't he? It seemed like he loved it. He was like quite endured by it, like he really enjoyed it. But it kind of helped that it was in Sweden. He's Swedish, so probably it was a more local thing that they could experiment quite a lot. And then, of course, he's not a lot on the film, so I'm guessing they didn't need to do this prosthetic a lot of times, because he probably didn't do a lot of days of filming. He probably did a few days only, so that probably helped a bit.
Well, he's so memorable. Hugo, I reckon that is a good place to wrap up the VFX Notes podcast on Dune.
Yeah,
we
there's so much more, but,
admit that we haven't been able to cover everything, but that's okay. I will direct people to befores and afters coverage of the film, where I've talked to Dean Egg and Paul Lambert in a couple of stories. There's a whole lot of behind the scenes that you would have watched on the YouTube version of this. So if you're only listening to the audio podcast, please check out the video edition that Hugo edits.
One thing about that, not a lot of people know, but YouTube has chapters. So if you go and check either the chapters on the timeline or even on the description of the video, you can click on the chapters and go directly to that place. So if you want to just check out a specific part of our discussion, it's all chaptered. It's all linked. By just clicking on them, you can advance to the chapters. We did that on all the videos, if you guys want to check.
Yep. So I also always make sure we give a shout out to where people can find us on social media. I'm at Ian Fails on Twitter, and of course beforesandafters.com. What about you, Hugo?
Yeah, I'm Hugo's Desk on YouTube, and then of course Hugo's Desk on Twitter, and also Hugo C. Guerra on Twitter as well. And then you can find me in other places, on Instagram, on Facebook as well, and on Patreon and those kind of places. But yeah, it's mostly Hugo's Desk if you type that on Google.
Are you sure that your handle isn't Spice's Life or something like that, Hugo? I thought it might be. No. Sorry.
It probably would be, yeah. I am gonna comp some blue eyes on both of us. No, I'm joking.
Oh man, we didn't talk about that. All right.
I know there's so much stuff that we didn't even talk about that. But on the realm of things, that is kind of small now, if you think about the rest.
True. That's been a lot of fun, Hugo. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you again to our Patreon supporters and our sponsors. Hugo, thank you so much. It's been really fun.
Okay. See you later. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.